Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to part 3 of the Summer Procurement web series. Today, we are joined by Stacy, wonderful individual. I had the opportunity to work with her a couple times over the past. And Stacy, if you could just kind of kick us off a little bit, share some of your journey, kind of where you've been in the contract management, procurement areas, and just kind of where you think things are going. I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And then the attorneys on this call know what's about to happen next, but to level set for everybody else, I'm not your attorney, and this is not legal advice. So we're all just here to have an informative chat. And if you hear something that piques your interest, you'll want to discuss it with either your company's in-house counsel or your attorney to learn a little bit more and see if any of these things apply to you or would be things that you can deploy. So now with the ground rules set, my name is Stacy Haley, and right now I am a contracts and negotiations manager at Roche. I think I was always probably destined to work in contracting, though, because as a kid, I was a voracious reader. I read all the ingredients on the back of a cereal box. And then as a young adult, I got nervous every time I dropped off my dry cleaning because I'd flip over the ticket on the back and see the disclaimer that, the dry cleaner is only responsible for $40 if they ruin something. And then I would be like, oh man, this soup costs more than $40. So I'm one of those people who likes to read the terms. And so in law school, I took contracting 1 and 2. And now I look at it and it's kind of cute. I thought it was kind of black and white and it would be really easy to apply in the real world. And, you all learn practicing law or out in business that nothing's black and white, but contracts really is something that applies to almost everything you do. So after I did the firm life, I worked in-house counsel at a software company, and I saw everything from licensing agreements to employment agreements. So there were all kinds of terms to be familiar with and to learn. And then I had the opportunity to join Roche. So my first 2 years at Roche, I worked in sales contracts, but then I met some procurement folks, and they were so approachable, likable, jacks of all trades when it comes to knowledge. And I thought, wow, that would be a really cool team to join. So when I joined them, people at the Indianapolis office had to do both sourcing and contracting. So I got a crash course in procurement so that I could do what I really wanted to do, the contracts and the negotiation. But as Roche refined their ways of working, now it's a lot more streamed. So specific people do the sourcing and specific people do contracts and other people do more negotiation. So it's been great. I've now been at Roche for about 9.5 years. The time flies. And it's been an interesting journey. A good example at first, we had to beg legal for authority to use DocuSign. And now I can't imagine a world without DocuSign. And then we have a lot more change, like outsourcing, increased use of FSPs like Officio, or Factor for use, and offshore centers of excellence for people doing different types of work that maybe isn't as complex as some of the legal work or contracting work done in the US. So it's been a blast. But if you're one of those people who likes to flip over the back of a receipt and read the terms, contracting might be the perfect journey for you in your career development.
Very cool. And coming from Battle Creek, Michigan, where, we are the cereal capital of the planet, completely get behind reading the back of your cereal boxes. Hey, for all the participants out there, if you want, we've actually been having a couple of people drop their LinkedIn links directly into the chat. And then if other people want to get together or connect, even outside of this, that can kind of facilitate that. Just wanted to mention that really quickly. So, Stacy, as we start to talk a little bit more, I think around traditionally what I would call, CLM or contract lifecycle management, what are some of the things that you really think would be a key strategy or a way to really start to optimize that the lifecycle management process overall?
In a world that is increasingly complex, things like AI are the topic that we're all talking about. I think there's an opportunity to actually get back to the basics. So this might not be the answer that you were expecting, but sometimes the answer is really to keep it simple. And especially as more people are working remote, I think it's sometimes hard to get everybody going in the same direction at the same time. So start at the basics, have a plan. Is there a clear life cycle management plan? And has it been communicated to a team? And does your team really understand that process? Which seems like such a basic question, but I don't think it's always the case, especially when people are all in different geographies at different points in their careers. So going back to that basic question, do you have a plan? Does your team know the plan? And then can they deploy the plan? So it's dorky, but I love to call templates team plates, because if a team doesn't know how to use a template, they won't be able to fill it in, get the right terms in there, get the right KPIs or SLAs, the things that are really important to the business. So until those templates become team plates in your process, you're really not going to deploy them effectively. And then the next step, that's a really simple thing, but are you doing periodic reviews? So are you asking business stakeholders whether these terms still fit, especially if a template or a team plate is really old and it's not one that's been looked at in a few years? And are those stakeholders really involved? Are they being asked the questions like, are we capturing the things that matter most to you? So I think there's a lot going on in the space with AI and tools that redline for you, but it doesn't replace that human touch of, do we have a plan and is it working for this business entity?
You know, it's interesting hearing you mention AI a couple of times. Still speaking with a couple of my friends who are still practicing defense law and prosecutorial, actually, in the public sector as well. And you know, when you start looking at pulling together a brief or something and leveraging AI to generate 70, 65% of a document, and then having really that individual expert come over the top of it, leverage that to accelerate the process and the turn. And I mention that because, you know, since you have kind of bridged both sides here, right? Obviously getting your start really focused on contract, more, we'll call it the legal world, clearly by the disclaimer. I'll probably have to think 2 or 3 more times about that. But, you know, kind of starting out in the contracting space and then really kind of moving over, but still staying in contracts, but getting into the procurement space. You know, what are your thoughts on maybe some areas where you can really start to get some cost saving opportunities, you know, by going through and really leveraging the contract management process? What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So Roche, you know, I'm working in the med pharma and life sciences type space, and Roche acquires so much data. So I don't even want to disclose, you know, I can't anyway, but how much we spend with a company like IQVIA. But the thing that blows my mind sometimes is how data purchases are not effectively tracked. So there's not always a good mechanism for ensuring that there's not duplication of purchases for things like subscriptions to data. When we do little reviews, sometimes we find that multiple teams and departments are purchasing the exact same thing. And there could have been a cost savings there if seats were added to an existing subscription instead of just everybody buying their own subscription. So what you really need is a mechanism to track certain purchases that may be easily duplicated. And then the other thing is you really need a mechanism to track termination dates and extension dates. So something that I think a lot of people really like are evergreen agreements, because you just sign them once and they keep going in perpetuity, maybe auto renewing every year or whatever the term on it is. But those can be a little bit dangerous, especially with suppliers that you're not necessarily happy with, maybe ones that are on a PIP, a performance improvement plan, something like that. Because if you don't provide notice, whatever your contract prescribes, 60 days, 6 months in advance of that auto renewal, then you're stuck with that supplier or those services for another, whatever the term of the agreement is, or you're stuck paying for that term of services and you're not getting them. This is something that actually happened at my work. Somebody who was very high up in the benefits department told a supplier over the phone that it wasn't working out and they weren't going to use them next year. And then in some subsequent emails, they said they were parting ways, but the contract prescribed written notice by certified mail. And so we ended up having to pay for that supplier's services for the next year because they stood really, really hard and fast. They weren't willing to just do 3 months because of the lapse in proper notice. They said, no, you're on the hook for the entire year. And we didn't have a lot of recourse there because we didn't meet our obligation in that agreement. So again, making sure that you're tracking things so it's not duplicating data purchases and it's not missing things like termination dates. That's a good place to start.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I think that also starts to really look at the end-to-end process. I think a lot of people or organizational teams can get very focused on, hey, I'm in sourcing, I'm doing sourcing, I'm in contracting, I'm doing contracting, procurement, doing procurement. And, there can be this kind of lack of the end to end because if you have an evergreen or if you have an auto renew clause in there, every time that's coming up, just because you're communicating that doesn't mean necessarily on the procurement side you are as well. It's it's interesting. I kind of think of that as just one more risk from an organizational standpoint,
right?
Where hey, as a fiduciary responsibility to the org, the goal, of course, is to reduce risk overall for the organization, improve shareholder value, etc. As we look at this and kind of bouncing out of what I'd call a little bit of the operational, what are your thoughts around, really starting to leverage the contract management systems to help reduce the risk of the organization?
And I think a first step is clear DOA, that delegation of authority, so that the right people are making the right choices with respect to contracts. And so if you have a sales rep signing some sort of services agreement, is that the best thing for the organization when that person might be leaving in a year or two to go do something else, but the organization is stuck with those services? So is that person really the right person to sign that agreement? So a clear DOA so that the right people are approving, signing documents, making choices, and a DOA that somebody can locate on your company intranet or that's tied to your employee directory, maybe a signatory authority matrix so that the dollar amounts are lining up. That's one big thing, preventing the wrong people from signing either the right or the wrong agreements, because that's always a risk. The other thing that ties in with those evergreen agreements is reviewing notice provisions. That's something that blows my mind too on a daily basis. I'll pull up a contract that's still alive from 2010, and the notice provisions are either sales reps that are no longer at either organization and weren't there long and long ago, or the thing that's a dinosaur now is a fax machine. A lot of times those contracts have notice provisions that give a fax number, but a lot of people don't even have fax machines anymore. So a great project, if you have some summer interns or something like that, is to go through and look at notice provisions and make sure that they're done in a thoughtful way. So for example, making sure that your internal organization, the notice provision is going to, for example, a D list in your legal department or contracting department, or a box that's just monitored by somebody. So it's not going to John Doe, Jane Doe sales rep who hasn't been there ages in a fax machine that was unplugged forever ago. So those are some good places to start.
No, completely fair. I know kind of a best practice whenever myself or my team is working through this is, rather than assigning something to an individual, make sure it's assigned to a group or an alias group in there that's
Yes.
constantly monitored. We touched lightly on AI, just very briefly. Obviously, that's a very hot topic, just kind of across the board writ large. But when you think about, potentially AI, but then really other items, what are you seeing potentially as some of either some new topics that are kind of starting to percolate up, or some additional risks? Obviously, it doesn't take long. I think every other day, there's another data breach or something like that. But I'm curious.
Yes. So if I was going to law school today, so if any of your kids are going to law school, point them towards privacy law, because I think that is the key player for so many corporate legal departments now. It's their privacy team. And it's because there's so many state nuanced data request requirements, privacy compliance requirements. So privacy law, to me, that's just a super hot topic right now. And then also looking at your cyber liability language. I think we're all probably thinking about it if you're in Indiana, with what's happened with Ascension St. Vincent or even CrowdStrike last week. We're all thinking about those tech terms, and look at your cyber liability language, or if you even have it. A lot of old agreements will specify things like automotive liability, professional liability, but now as a company, we're adding cyber liability to our insurance requirements. A really great place to start is $1 million per occurrence and $2 million in the aggregate for relatively low risk services. Because honestly, you can't touch a data breach for less than a lot of money these days. So I know 1 or 2 as a starting point might seem high for low risk services, but when you look at the cost to remediate a data breach, something like that, those are really starting points, but they're starting points. So if you're a company that's handling patient data, financial data, IT sector type things, what we look at as a company is $5 million per occurrence and $10 million in the aggregate. And the other thing that, as you think about adding cyber liability language, is ask for certificates of coverage, because I do think sometimes, especially small businesses, new businesses, they're so eager to contract that they don't read all of the terms. They just want to get to how much they're going to be paid for services. And they may not notice your insurance requirements, especially with something new like cyber liability. So if it's a company that you haven't done business with before, a small company, and then also some of those diverse spends like hub zone companies that might be smaller and new to the space, ask them for certificates of coverage to make sure that they actually have it. And if they don't, or they can't agree to those provisions, then a risk discussion needs to take place about whether it's a good idea to contract with that company, which I hate saying because we all want to grow spend with hub zone businesses and other diverse entities. But these smaller companies, if they can't meet insurance requirements, that's a potential risk to your organization. And then also, as you get to know your cyber liability policy, look at the carve outs. So CrowdStrike, we'll come back to that. Technology updates and improvements, that's usually a carve out in a cyber liability policy. Human errors, that's another one. So I think probably the cyber liability policy at CrowdStrike is not going to help them. But St. Vincent Ascension, maybe that's a policy that they can invoke, depending on the details of their precise situation. Maybe that'll help them cover their losses. But I think CrowdStrike's probably out of luck.
Yeah, well, I mean, CrowdStrike in general, I mean, pretty much anything where you have a significant consolidation, that increases the risk, of course. And then talking about privacy, man, if you are touching PII, HIPAA, et cetera, kind of across the board,
Yes.
all of that also starts to get exciting / terrifying.
Yes.
Obviously, to both you and the organization overall. As kind of, I think as we're going through this and chatting about it, I'd be curious what your thoughts are just a little bit when we start kind of on the actual life cycle. Hey, creating, approving, executing a contract. Are there just any general tips or ideas or best practices that you'd throw out there? Obviously leveraging some sort of a support system like an SAP Ariba in the back end.
Number one, have a playbook. So have something that you can share with your organization that covers the plan. Now, if you notice, I said playbook. I didn't say SOP. I didn't say policy. And the reason why you want to call something like this your best practices suggestions or playbook is because if you call it an SOP or a policy, that creates some audit risk, because a policy means something that must be followed to a T. And if there's a little wiggle room and then someone doesn't follow something to a T, either because it was more expeditious for them or they didn't understand exactly what was expected, and there's an audit either internally or externally, that's a potential audit finding because something wasn't done to the letter of your SOP. But if you call it a playbook, you have a little more wiggle room there for a guide to how to do things the best way without creating a little bit of risk. A tool that I actually like is Visual Policy Playbook. What it allows you to do is click on a part of a contract. So we'll just pick a really easy one, governing law. And the product lets you click that paragraph, and then it'll have in green, we want California, we want Indiana, we want Delaware as the governing law. Then yellow, things that you can accept, like anywhere but Texas and Louisiana or something like that. And then it'll have red, like, no, this is something that has to go to legal. Like, for example, if a foreign jurisdiction is suggested during the redlining process, that means either no, stop, or call legal for help and guidance. So some kind of interactive item like that can really help your team find answers really, really fast instead of scrolling through a PDF playbook. Oh, and that makes me think too, there's a group on LinkedIn called In-House Connect. And I really like getting their emails because they do a lot of free CLEs. So if anybody here is an attorney that needs CLE credit, they're doing a free CLE on July 30th about contracting playbooks. So look them up on LinkedIn, or if you can't find it, drop me a line on LinkedIn and I'll send you the link. And you can get a little bit of background on where to start with creating contracting playbooks.
Very cool. No, nice tip there. I know it's interesting kind of hearing you mention around playbook versus a standard operating procedure practice. Very much the same on the consulting side of the world, right? You are committing to implementing a leading practice, not a quote best practice, just because you get that little bit of legalese wiggle room in there as well. So, we've kind of touched on it, I think, up the top, like with DocuSign and just the topic in general. But, as you look at just the space from an automation standpoint, right, from really leveraging the technology, lots of opportunity, especially if you're coming from we store everything out on the shared drive, to a full-blown system. Just kind of what are your thoughts in terms of best ways to streamline or accelerate the processes in that kind of procurement contracting space?
Sure. Well, if you're working at a big organization, most likely they already have a CLM tool, whether it's through an SAP partner, iCertis, Ironclad is one that a lot of people use. If you're not at a large organization, if you're a small business owner, even a CLM solution could be really good for you for a few reasons. It keeps all your contracts secure in one place. It can provide those automatic notifications, but it can also prevent losing things, which again sounds so basic, but all of these tools tie to DocuSign so that when a DocuSign goes through, it automatically puts that fully executed contract in this database and in this tool. And you would be surprised how many things used to get lost. People would either wet sign things or DocuSign things, and then they were in their email until the person left an organization, or stored on their laptop, which was destroyed when they departed, or even worse, wet signed and put in a file cabinet somewhere. Thankfully, that doesn't happen as much anymore, but really you need a great CLM tool that people are comfortable using. In terms of automation and AI, the verdict's still out for me. There's a lot of AI tools that you can pilot right now. And, I think there's some value to them. An example that I can give you is I was responsible for some outreach programs at a Roche affiliate called Genentech in California. And they bring elementary school students onto campus and let them do science experiments and meet scientists and, wear the goggles and get excited about science. And these children, their parents were given a 7-page release to sign. And somebody in the business contacted me and said, can you make this easier, for a couple of reasons? First of all, 7 pages is excessive for, my child getting to come do a science experiment. But then the other thing is a lot of the students out there were elementary school kids reading these releases to their parents or just handing to them and signing it because English wasn't their first language. These parents didn't know what they were signing. It was really difficult for them to read and understand. And so the point I promise one's coming is I ran part of these releases through ChatGPT and I said, make this simple. And then I even tried it with a few different reading levels, like put this on an 8th grade reading level. And we were able to collapse that 7-page release down to 2 pages by taking out all of the lawyer words like heretofore and contributory negligence, the things that really weren't needed in a release for elementary school kids. Now, I still was looking for certain privacy requirements and requirements that the school board put forth, but overall, I was able to use a Chat GPT type tool to really simplify it. So that was very, very helpful to me. But in terms of like matching up what KPIs are told to you by a stakeholder with what's actually written in an agreement, AI can't replace that. It can suggest KPIs, but it doesn't know what your particular business needs and what your stakeholders want to improve. So it can't replace us all, but it can help.
Not yet. But
not yet.
That is a great comment, though, Stacy, because even what I'm seeing, whether that's in initial drafting or just looking reviews or secondary clauses across the board, what I would say is, number one, even if you're not using an AI tool, GPT, et cetera, on a day-to-day basis, start to play with them. Just so you're getting a feel for, okay, how does it work? What's work? I thought the example you gave there around, dropping in a 7-page document and saying, hey, simplify this and drop it down to a 5th grade reading level.
Yeah.
Or something like that, right? I mean, and even then, once again, kind of going back to earlier, that gets it to, maybe it's 80 or 90% of the way there, still requires eyes on it to wrap it up. And I think, probably a perfect transition. I know we're starting to come into the end of the discussion, but, outside of AI, what are some of the future trends, or where do you kind of, as you start leaning forward, what's kind of continuing to get you excited around kind of the broader contract management space?
This is more through my eyes, the lens that I view it, but contracting really is starting to feel like a community. The truth of the matter is we're a section of the Bar Association, or we're members of the Bar Association that don't have a section. Elder law has a section, corporate law, even animal law has a section, but there isn't a section for people who do contracts every day. But it's feeling like a community because there are groups springing up like contract nerds. I'm a contract nerd. What can I say? But this group is a networking group on LinkedIn, but then also they have a webpage and everything. And they put networking events on. They share playbooks. They do free CLEs for the attorneys. Just last week, we were looking at handbook best practices, and they sent out templates that were both from the like pro business side and then the pro customer side so that you could compare and look. So even though we don't have a bar association section yet, it's starting to feel more like a community, and we're getting accepted by the procurement people a little bit more as collaborators. I think another opportunity for networking here, if you're in central Indiana, is the Indiana Procurement Leaders. So it's a group also on LinkedIn, but a couple times a year, they're in-person events where you can learn about different procurement tips, meet other people in the procurement community across all sizes of companies and different business sectors. So, we're not just the people in the cube that are making the paper go from the left to the right on a given day. We're looked at as procurement partners and people that are forming these groups like Contract Nerds to share best practices and network and be a community.
Emphasis on the nerd there. I love it. So listen,
I'm a nerd. What can I say?
Embrace it. That's completely appropriate. So listen, I know we're just about out of time. Stacy, I wanted to thank you very much, obviously, for jumping on here, sharing some of your advice and just thoughts in the contract management space. Once again, remember the disclaimer from the top. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your own counsel. And, just for the broader audience, once again, thank you very much. We will be hosting our final conversation this summer. That's going to be focused on optimizing supplier relationships. And that'll be coming out on Thursday, August 22nd. Same bat time, same bat channel, 12 to 12:30. Allow me to date myself with that reference. But other than that, really appreciate you coming out here, attending it, and look forward to the next conversation. Thanks again, Stacy.
My pleasure. Thank you all for coming.
Bye-bye.